Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. As always, this is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and I'd like to take this opportunity to personally thank you for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Now, folks, without any further ado, let's go ahead and delve into the topic I have slated to be the central topic for today's program because it's a big one. Joe Biden has essentially decided that since everything else he has tried up until this point in time has failed, that he's going to push gun control. It's a move of desperation, and it is clearly a move of desperation because gun control, if you look all throughout the country right now, is a losing issue. Constitutional carry has just passed in Georgia, essentially. It's going in more southeastern states. It's becoming the accepted norm throughout the United States. And so that really does put the Biden administration in a weakened position. Irrespective of that fact, however, Biden thinks it is a winning position. He thinks that he can essentially form a coalition of the willing in the left to go after the right to keep and bear arms. However, the more radical fringes of the left actually want guns because they want to foment a sort of violent revolution. But the bizarre thing about all of this is that Biden decided to make this pivot where he is essentially making gun control the sole definitive issue for the looming midterm elections, which are slated for this November at an event which was for two fallen NYPD officers who were killed last month. It's the sort of thing you can't make up, folks. It's the sort of thing that makes you wonder how they came up with this. And this one comes to us over at the Post-Millennial by Hannah Nightingale. Basically says, Biden stretches the need for gun control after NYPD officers were murdered by career criminal. On Thursday, President Joe Biden attended a gun violence strategies partnership meeting in New York City alongside Attorney General Merrick Garland, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, and New York Governor Kathy Hochul. He opened the meeting by talking about the recent deaths of New York City police officers Wilbert Mora and Jason Rivera, who were killed late last month in a shooting. And he stated, "Let me start by saying Detective Wilbert Mora and Jason Rivera are the who and what law enforcement ought to be." He said he's spoken to their families, and their loss for the city is also a loss for the nation. Yet, again, this is the same Democrat Party that pushed for defund the police all through 2020. This is the same Democrat Party that essentially told us that we have to allow Black Lives Matters and Antifa members to go free, and they're the ones that paid the bail for them. But it gets worse. Because Biden went on to say, future's cut short by a man with a stolen Glock with 40 rounds, a magazine with 40 rounds, and it's really a weapon of war. You see, folks, that's their narrative and agenda coming to the epicenter all over again. It's what they have. It's all they have. It's disgusting. But why do they play this? They play this because they have to try something. Defund the police was unpopular. And, it's been his narrative and agenda to sit there and claim that these things are weapons of war and therefore they should not be allowed to be owned by the citizens. In fact, he sat there and said during that same event that he could see no logical justification as to why anyone would need to have that gun. But, there is a ready-made answer for that. Remember in 2020, the summer of love, when we watched violence erupt in all of the cities of America, and these blue cities had essentially catch and release policies implemented and put into place, and we watched as violence unfurled before our eyes when they even gave Seattle to them? Yeah. That in and of itself is a reason enough. There's another reason enough as to why you would need that many rounds. Look at the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Look at how those frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists did everything in their power in an attempt to murder Kyle Rittenhouse. And of course, the left is still fomenting about that. They're still fuming and are just livid over that. But it speaks volumes as to what their modus operandi is here, because they claim that you don't need to have those kinds of magazines, and then they try and foist this upon us as though it is a public health crisis. In fact, that is the very language that they utilize. They referred to it as a public health epidemic. He basically said, that whole part. He talked also about how he was proud of when he was in the Senate, he was able to get the weapons and the size of magazines outlaw. And then he, of course, bitches that it got changed, it got overruled, but I don't see any rationale why there should be such a weapon able to be purchased. It doesn't violate anybody's Second Amendment rights to deny that. Yes, it does. Yes, it does, Biden. It does, because the clear and concise language contained within the Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And it means keep and bear arms. That means to be able to use them, to have all of the accoutrements that are necessary to utilize and to use them. But this, of course, is not going to cross his mind. It's not going to be the central element that he brings up because, again, the narrative is about power, manipulation, corruption, and control. And Biden's goal in all of this is to be able to tell us that we shouldn't have the right to defend ourselves, that leftist narrative is simply that which we saw unfurl before the shocked and horrified eyes of the nation in response to the Kyle Rittenhouse case, where they wanted it to be that he would just allow himself to be killed. Why? Because he was white. Why? Because he was out. That is the type of vitriol that the left is spewing here. But it gets even worse, because essentially what they want to do is they want to reward these epicenters of growing violent crime, where the local city administration and leadership has implemented policies that deprive people of the ability to defend themselves, and has also embraced this Marxist idea of coddling criminals. That's what they want to do. This Rescue America plan that was a bipartisan rescue of Biden's agenda, for want of a better term, is essentially a massive redistributive scheme where we take money from red states that have, actually listened to their constituents and actually care about the well-being of their constituents, and attempt to shuffle that money to blue states where there are catch-and-release policies implemented by George Soros-funded district attorneys that allow these criminals to be released and to prey upon the average citizens of their jurisdiction. That is a disgusting policy, and it is a way to punish those areas that do not wish to accept left-wing ideology, that do not wish to bend the knee or to prostrate themselves before an arrogant and haughty Biden administration. And that's what this really plays out to. It's a way for them to continue to push their utopian socialist nonsense at the cost of average citizens everywhere. You see, they want to spread the misery. It's about spreading their misery. It's about forcing their ideology down our throats. And we can see it in some of the language they used. Biden continued on to state that every day in the country, 316 people are shot and 106 are killed. So far this year, 6 NYPD officers have become the victims of gun violence in the city. No, they were shot because of criminals that were released thanks to these left-wing policies, and we're now going to shuffle and funnel money to these places from other places that disagree because the left-wing ideology has to be crammed down our throats. He says enough is enough. I'll agree with that. Enough is enough when it comes to these left-wing policies that you're trying to force down our throats, but he also expressed a number of points that he set forth in his spring initial actions. Why do these things always sound like the 5-year programs that Stalin implemented? Why is it that the left-wing ideology always has to be one of these 5-point plans? It's ridiculous. But what he calls the gun violence public health epidemic, you see, here it goes. The answer is not to abandon our streets. That's not the answer. The answer is to come together, police and communities, building trust and making us all safer. The answer is not to defund the police, even though his party said that over and over and over again ad nauseum. It's to give you the tools, the training, the funding to be partners, to be protectors. Biden said that he has called on Congress to pass a budget providing an additional $300 million to cities like New York for community policing and an additional $200 million to invest in community violence intervention programs. There you have it. There you have it. It boils back down to their whole agenda being about throwing red meat to their red base, attempting to have after-school programs where we reward hellions, and instead of incentivizing good family backgrounds and allowing there to be an incentive to have two-parent households, no, they continue to double down on these socialist agendas. And on top of this, we are going to see a lot of gaslightings, a lot of attempts by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating legacy media to sit there and paint the Democrats as actually being the champions of law and order, when that's not the case. And we're going to see how they're going to sit there and say that they were never for defunding the police, even though that was their chartered slogan the entire time of the 2020 elections. We saw it over and over again ad nauseum, but the Orwellian nightmare has to play out the way that it does. They have to be able to have their little narrative. And in the arena of politics, a lot of times, perspective matters more than reality. And that is what they are going to push here again. It's all part and parcel of this disgusting plan. And so, what's the other aspect of what they're attempting to attack here? Well, Biden has essentially come forth and made it perfectly clear that he also wants to go after what he was referring to as rogue gun dealers. Not sure what those are, but it's anybody, of course, who wants to have protections for gun companies and wants to be able to have private sales and to be able to exercise their full property rights when it comes to their personal property. He also wants to remove liability protections for firearms manufacturers, which would be violative of products liability law that has been well established for well over a century. This is typical of the left. It's, again, attempting to form a bifurcated or two-part system where they have different rules with different applications for themselves and for the rest of us. And yet, they realize that the only way that they can maintain their grip on power is to force their mandates and attempt to redistribute funding through forced coercion and coercive policies like this. That is what we're seeing, and it's inexorable. It's inescapable. It's the dark side and ugly face of the various initiatives and agendas that they are forcing upon us. This whole universal background checks. Why is it that they want to make it harder for law-abiding citizens, and yet they continue to attempt to coddle criminals? Doesn't that raise some serious questions? You think it would. You'd think that this would be something that ought to be getting loads of discussion. But it doesn't. Not with this group. Not with their desire to push these rabid left-wing policies. And what does it boil down to? They must really think we're stupid. That we're too stupid to catch on to the initiatives that they're foisting, that we are failing to see the light for what it is, and that we will fall for anything. Now, maybe their voters will. Their voters certainly seem to have a well-established track record of falling for anything and pushing for mindless groupthink collectivization without as much of a second thought to the unintended consequences which might arise directly therefrom. That's part and parcel of the way they are. But does it do anything for the rest of us? Well, no. The only thing that we're getting out of this is that we're going to get more failed left-wing centralized policies designed to steal money from communities that actually know how to properly govern themselves and to reward the type of childish and petulant behavior that we see running rampant in the Antifa zones and the Black Lives Matter zones. Again, they are attempting to foist all of their unpopular narrative and agenda onto us. And it is for this very reason, ladies and gentlemen, that we mustn't give an inch to them, as they will attempt to completely wipe out our right to keep and bear arms. They are going to paint it in a light where they make us look bad, or make us look as though we are the ones that have instigated and caused these problems, when each and every time, without fail, it has been their policies and their agenda that has forced these types of deleterious results onto us. Biden and his minions attempting to paint this as a public health crisis, this is the type of propagandist narrative and agenda that they have latched onto since the time of the Obama administration. In fact, it dates back to before that, but that is what they thought as something that could gain traction. It was that main initiative and line that they really latched onto in the immediate wake and aftermath of the Sandy Hook incident. So if they can label it as that way, which is an intellectually disingenuous way to label it, they think that then more people will be willing to accept their policies and that the pro-Second Amendment lobby and crowd will back down. But we won't. There is an inherent reason as to why we won't back down. These are fundamental rights that are enjoyed and should be exercised by all Americans. They are constitutionally protected rights, and that is going to be the major hiccup that the leftists run into time and again, and this is partly why they loathe and despise the Constitution as much as they do. They see that the Constitution, by its very design, inhibits and disrupts them, that it throws a wrench into all of their plans to dismantle that which has become known rightly as being quintessentially American, such as the ability to defend our right to life, self-defense, and the right to keep and bear arms. It's part of the American culture, and it rightly should be part of it, because remember, it was when they came for the arms and armament that we really stood up and said enough is enough, and we fought to establish this new experiment in representational government, and to break the chains and shackles of a tyrannical government. Well, this government is fast pushing us into a position where we have to ask similar questions. Just as the Freedom Convoy up in Canada is having to ask these difficult questions. When government ignores the rights of the people and begins to treat the people as though they are second-class citizens in their own country, then yes, we have a major problem, one that will need to be addressed. So, as I have been stating so many times, it is absolutely imperative that we be proactive in the midterm elections slated for this November to send that resounding message to the members in the upper echelons of government that no, we aren't going to accept this sort of redistributive scheme to reward the bad behavior of blue areas, and we are not going to allow our rights to be trampled upon or abridged. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to once again thank you for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at the Wright Flyer. Hope to see you again next time. Please do take care. See you around.